Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. This is the post-game podcast. Today on the show, why the Timberwolves collapsed against the Washington Wizards, where Chris Finch deserves some blame, and also what happened to Anthony Edwards after a fantastic start to the game, terrible finish, really, and also Rudy Gobert, some interior issues offensively. A lot of things went wrong in this game. I want to break down exactly what happened and what needs to change next time out. It's all upcoming on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. Happy Friday, everybody. Happy weekend. Happy All-Star weekend. Of course, Rising Stars game tonight. All-Star Saturday is the best day of the three. And then the actual All-Star game Sunday with Anthony Edwards in it. We'll talk more, of course, about that on Monday. Today, though, it is the post-game podcast, all things Wolves Wizards. What happened late? Chris Finch, where he deserves some blame down the stretch of Wolves Wizards. It's all coming on the show. First of all, though, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. More great local sports coverage 24/7, and it's free. Download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app today on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. Also, you can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken, and that's with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. I would have loved to talk about Wolves Wizards. I would have loved to start with Anthony Edwards and just how incredible he was in the first 5-6 minutes of this game. He had 16 points in like the first half of the first quarter. And for all the world, I thought that's how we were going to open this podcast. The Wolves were up 20 early on the Wizards. I think it was 28-8. And you know, kind of maintained. They were up 15 at the end of the first quarter. It was what was it? 7, I think, at halftime, or 8 points at halftime. The Wolves lead was. And third quarter got a bit dicey. We'll get into that. But then, of course, the fourth quarter was a complete and utter collapse for the Timberwolves. So we have to start there. And specifically, what happened? And frankly, like I don't love blaming Chris Finch because I just think it's generally pretty lazy to say, it's on the head coach because the players are good, right? Like it's got to be the coach's fault. Can't fire all the players. You got to fire the coach, that sort of thing. Not that anybody's seriously calling for Chris Finch to be fired at this point, but you know, a few weeks ago, we were hearing that, right? Like from the fan base, right? From Twitter. Not necessarily like actual rumors because that's crazy. But this was a game where there were some misses, I think, from Chris Finch. So let's start there. First of all, down the stretch, the Timberwolves needed to make some adjustments on Bradley Beal. And Beal had a relatively quiet open to this game. Jaden McDaniels did well on him for much of the game. But late, backing up a half step here, a couple nights ago on what was it? Tuesday, the Timberwolves played. Is that right? No, Monday, the Timberwolves played last. The win over Dallas, right? So Dallas is playing ultra small. The Timberwolves are giving up this, giving back this lead, right? They did the same thing Monday. They had a big lead early fourth quarter, 20-some points, even an even bigger lead, albeit against a better team. Kyrie Irving starts to go nuts. The Mavs start to, get it down to 10, 12 points. Finch pulls Rudy Gobert off the floor. The Wolves go small. Kyle Anderson plays the 5. And it works. Now, obviously, it got down to a one-possession game, and it worked to the extent that the Wolves won. And also, Kyle Anderson made a couple of really strong defensive plays himself. But Finch decided to do that, and even said after the game he thought about going back to Rudy with 2-3 minutes to play, but then changed his mind. I spent much of Tuesday's show, the post-game pod on Tuesday, praising Chris Finch for pushing the right buttons, pulling the right levers, and I think he deserves some blame for not doing that in this game. Bradley Beal just kept exploiting the Timberwolves in pick and roll. And McDaniels was staying attached to Beal at the hip, following him around screens, because you obviously can't go under screens against Beal, right? But he was trailing him around screens, trying to make him put the ball on the floor, because you'd rather have Beal do that than shooting threes behind a screener, right? The problem was that Gobert couldn't recover in time to stay and to try and corral Beal. Beal was getting to the basket, had an and one down the stretch that was big, hit a couple of floaters, like doing things that Bradley Beal can do. And you generally would rather him try to do those things than shoot open threes. But Beal's like, he's a complete scorer now, more so than he was a few years ago, right? And McDaniel's trailing him around screens and Gobert trying but not able to catch up to him to block a shot at the rim. And frankly, the Wolves were lucky there weren't more fouls called when Beal was going to the basket late in the game. That wasn't the correct strategy. Kristaps Porzingis, for as much as he's hurt the Wolves in the past, down the stretch in this game, he wasn't the issue. The Wolves, half the time, not half the time, but some of the time, they were guarding him with Kyle Anderson anyway in this game. Porzingis finished with 14 points on 12 shots. Like he wasn't a big part of the game plan. And Daniel Gafford wasn't on the floor, right? He started the game. He's not on the floor down the stretch. So I think Corey Kispert and Denny Avdija were the ones that were on the floor the most down the stretch in terms of bigs. So if I'm Chris Finch, I pull Gobert again, right? I think you leave Kyle Anderson on because then you're much more switchable and you can actually switch that action and feel pretty good about it. And yes, Bradley Beal can beat Kyle Anderson off the dribble, but Kyle Anderson has a better shot of staying in front of him than Gobert after dealing with the screen, or McDaniels, who's trailing him around a screen, right? So I think first of all, you have to play small. And it's a whole other, I don't want to get into it now. It's a whole other conversation. Like what does that say about the trade? What does that say about Gobert? Blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter if you win, right? And you're not going to win if this is your strategy against Bradley Beal down the stretch. So I would have had Gobert off the floor, and you could have put Prince on the floor to be more switchable. Like, this is crazy, and Chris Finch wouldn't do this. Why not go with Josh Minott? Josh Minott, when he got rotation minutes, the one non-garbage time game he played in on the road trip, switchable player. I'm not saying you put him on Bradley Beal down the stretch, but I'm saying you put him on the floor, tell him to go guard, Kispert, or go guard, even guard Porzingis, right? Like, what are they going to do? Are you going to post up Kristaps Porzingis? Minott's long enough and bouncy enough to contest threes, right? And then you get Minott in the switch, you get him in the screen and roll action, and the Wizards were simply hunting Gobert. That's what they were doing because they knew the Wolves didn't have an answer for it. And we'll talk about this later, but it's not like Gobert is being utilized offensively for the Wolves either. So there's no purpose for him being on the floor in that situation. The second thing that I think Chris Finch made a mistake with is he finished this game with, at least one, if not two timeouts in his pocket. And you look at the fourth quarter, if you just go and look at the play-by-play from the fourth quarter, go watch it back. The Timberwolves called one timeout during this. I'm gonna make sure that I get the actual minute marks here of the timeouts. The Timberwolves called one timeout down the stretch until it was basically over. The Wolves were up 7. They were up 7 with 5 minutes to play. Kyle Anderson was fouled on a three-pointer in the corner, three-point attempt in the corner, made all 3 free throws. The Wolves are up 99-92 with just over 5 minutes to play. The first Wolves timeout comes when it's a 4-point game, 101-97. Wolves up with 3:52 left. Finch does not call another timeout until there's 36 seconds left in the game and they're down 4. So the Wizards, over the next 3+ minutes, went on a 13-5 run, and the Timberwolves did not call a timeout. The Wizards didn't call a timeout either because they didn't need it, right? There was no stoppage in play. And I said this on Twitter. I thought the Wolves looked really tired all game. They did play their starters heavy minutes, but they've only played 2 games in 6 days. They haven't played since Monday. They've been home practicing for the last couple of days. I know it's the last game before the All-Star break. I know they played 61 games, which is insane in the first quote-unquote half of the season. But use your timeouts, man. You got to use the timeout there. Get them some rest for all the reasons, right? Give them some rest, reset things, say, hey, Ant, this isn't working on offense. We'll talk more about that. Let's do something different. Get Gobert off the floor, whatever, all those things, some combination of those things. Just use the timeout. That's the first step in that process. The Wolves don't do that. Finch doesn't do that. By the time he calls a timeout, they're down 4 with 36 seconds to play. They turned it over on the ensuing possession. Finch has a timeout left, so why not challenge the foul call on the other end after a basket in transition by DeLon Wright, and they win the challenge. But at that point, you're down 6 with 26 seconds left. So shouldn't have even had a timeout at that point. Shouldn't have let it get to that point without using your timeout, right? So those are my issues with what Finch did down the stretch. And to be clear, like, if you've never listened to the show before, I'm I don't get hot takey about coaching. Like, I think it's ridiculous, right? Like, these guys know what they're doing. I just think there were some misses in this game, and it's going to happen over the course of an 82-game season. I am not at all saying that that's the Wolves' problem. Finch is the problem. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying in this game, he made some mistakes. Things could have gone differently down the stretch. The players are ultimately culpable for what happens, obviously, and especially in a game like this, when and we'll get into some of the issues on the court, specific to the players and who had problems in this game. We'll get to individual studs and duds later. But Chris Finch is not blameless in this loss. In fact, I think there's plenty of blame to be placed on the Timberwolves head coach in this last game before the All-Star break. All right. Next, I want to get into a couple other takeaways from this one. I do want to talk about Ant's game. I do want to talk about Rudy's close to this game. And then we'll get into individual studs and duds. We're going to do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Nissan. Nissan's most electric player of the week is brought to you by the all-new, all-electric 2023 Nissan Ariya. Our player of the week for the Timberwolves, it's still got to be Anthony Edwards, right? He's still had an incredible scoring game. He's been fantastic lately, getting geared up for the All-Star weekend. And for the All-Star game itself, Anthony Edwards is Locked On Wolves. He is my All-Star of the week, my player of the week for the Timberwolves. There's no question about it. I mean, what did he have in this game? 32, 30, or I guess it was like 36. We'll talk more about Ant later, but for the week, Ant has been fantastic. It's exactly like the Nissan Ariya. The Nissan Ariya is electric, just like Anthony Edwards. Brilliantly fierce, fiercely elegant. All these things you can say about Ant. My favorite adjective to describe the Nissan Ariya that also works for Anthony Edwards is stunningly powerful. I actually watched the Washington Wizards broadcast the Wolves game, and Doc Gooden was on their broadcast. They were talking about, I forget the play-by-play guy's name, Chris Miller maybe. They're talking about how Anthony Edwards is so much more bigger, stronger, and more powerful than you'd expect him to be when you see him up close and in person. Even though when he's a great athlete, it's just it's a completely different animal to actually see him in person and up close. In that sort of a setting. Anthony Edwards delivers on duality, the combination of fierceness and elegance, beautiful but strong, a perfect way to describe Anthony Edwards and the Nissan Ariya, the perfect crossover. Anthony Edwards also has that, as is the Ariya. The 2023 Nissan Ariya packs pin to your seat power and premium intelligence, all in one EV, the all new, all electric 2023 Nissan Ariya. The EV is for people who love to drive. You can shop now at nissanusa.com. All right, let's talk about my other takeaways from this one. I talked a little bit about the Timberwolves defensively. Let's talk about the offensive issues. This was actually this also kind of falls under the heading of what Chris Finch could have done a little bit differently. The Wizards went to a zone at times in the third quarter. The Wolves were up. What was this in the third quarter? I think it was a 17-point game with like two to go. Yeah, the Wolves were up 18 with 2 minutes left in the third quarter. 18. It was 8 at halftime. The Wolves got it back up to 18 with 2 minutes left in the third. This wasn't your typical Timberwolves third quarter collapse. They're up 18 with 2 minutes left in the third, and then things get sloppy again, right? This was after a big Anthony Edwards run. We'll talk more about that. He was great in the third. They're up 18 with 2 left in the third. Things start to fall apart. The Wizards mix in some zone, both in the third and the fourth quarter, coming out of timeouts, etc. The Wolves had answered zone pretty well the last couple times out when teams did it, but in this game, they didn't. And Kyle Anderson still did some good things, kind of being put in the middle of the zone, floating around the free throw line, floating around the elbows. He missed 4 bunnies, like 5-10 foot little shot put floater type shots in the paint. He just biffed completely. He made a couple, but he missed more than he should have. And the decision making was okay, not perfect, right? Like, Kyle Anderson is still your best bet to be in that role, but the Wolves really struggled to deal with the zone. They weren't cutting against the zone. There was no activity offensively. It was Ant shooting threes over double teams, which he didn't do well all night, or it was Kyle Anderson missing shot puts from 10 feet out. It was Rudy Gobert missing a couple shots in the paint as well. The failure to deal with the zone alone was probably worth a couple of timeouts used, at least one timeout there in the fourth quarter. Like there just wasn't any cohesiveness to the Wolves offense outside of Ant's dominance in the first and third quarters. which brings me to my next point, which is Anthony Edwards. He was phenomenal at the start of this game. Had 16 points in the first 5.5 or so minutes of this game. And it felt like he was on his way to a 45-point performance. And he finished with what did I say, 34 in the game. But it ended up taking him 26 shots to get there. He was efficient in that he got to the line, but he only shot 3 of 10 outside the arc. I thought the shot selection, 2 of those 3 threes were very early in the first quarter. And the shot selection went downhill quickly for Ant. We've seen this, and there were actually some post-game comments in the locker room. I think it was Rudy Gobert, Conley maybe kind of alluded to it, talking about shot selection, decision-making when the team's up big, that guys start to kind of look for their own shot. They want to be a part of it, whatever. I'm paraphrasing, obviously. But that was Ant, right? Like, it was nobody else. There's no D'Angelo Russell on this team anymore. Nobody else was doing that. Ant had 26 shot attempts. Gobert had 15. I want to talk more about that. Kyle Anderson had 13. Nobody else had more than 10 on this team. Mike Conley only shot the ball 6 times, didn't score a single point in this game. Nobody on the bench shot the ball more than 8 times. So you're talking about a Wolves team with no Karl-Anthony Towns, of course, no D'Angelo Russell. And Anthony Edwards is like the only true high usage guy. And nobody else is really coming to the party. No one else is really, it's Ant that's forcing the issue a little bit too much. And of course, it didn't help matters that when he was off the floor, like early in the fourth quarter, when he was getting a rest, the Wolves bench couldn't do anything either. Like, that was a big issue in this game too. Noel had 6 points on 8 shots in 13 minutes, did not play well. Was actually played really poorly. Naz Reid was not great. He had like one really nice basket, nice move. Not a good game for Naz. Jordan McLaughlin was quiet, which is maybe a nice way to put it. Like, there was no consistency from the Timberwolves bench in this game. And that was a big issue too. So it's not all on Ant, but Ant's shot selection got progressively worse. He had the massive open to the first quarter. He had a really good middle of the third quarter, but the second quarter was bad when he was in the game. The first part of the third quarter was bad. The last part of the fourth quarter was bad. I think he only made 1 field goal in the fourth quarter, maybe 2. Ant did. So consistency level for Ant, and it's something we've talked about all season. We've talked about it, in 2+ years of Ant's career, right? Again, he's 21, but consistency, and especially in games like this, just is not there. And he finished with 6 turnovers, 3 assists. Like, that's not, and it's shot making too for the Wolves as a team, right? The Timberwolves starters combined to shoot 6 of 19 on 3-point attempts in this game. 6 of 19, that's roughly 30-ish%, right? Well, not that the bench was any better, right? The bench combined to shoot 2 of 10 from 3. So the bench shot 20% from 3. The starter shot 30% from 3. They've shot 27.6% as a team. They were missing open shots, right? Ant's shot selection was not good. McDaniels was good. Everyone else, Conley missed open threes. Kyle Anderson missed his only open 3-point attempt. Naz missed his open shots. Jalen Noel was miserable, as we talked about. So all those things kind of played into it. But it stems from the issues dealing with the zone. It stems from Ant trying to overcome double teams by himself and not getting any help. And that's kind of it. Those are the biggest issues. There were some individual performances that stuck out. Let's talk about Rudy, actually, before we get to studs and duds. Gobert started this game shooting 6 of 6 from the field. In fact, through the first minute of the third quarter, Gobert is 4 of 4 in the first half, 6 of 6 from the field in the first 25 minutes of the game, right? Into the first minute of the third quarter. He finished the game shooting 2 of 9. He had 1 point on 0 of 2 shooting from the field in the fourth quarter, got fouled and made 1 free throw. 1 point in the fourth quarter for Rudy Gobert in a game in which he scored 17. He had 17 and 19. Gobert is not, to be clear, not the reason the Timberwolves lost this game, but he was one of many Timberwolves that really struggled in the paint. Gobert, Kyle Anderson, were a couple of Ant misses down the stretch in the paint where, could have been a foul, but he probably could have made the shot. But Gobert's lack of ability to finish, he was perfect from the field on Monday against Dallas, started this game perfect, 6 of 6, 2 of 9 from the early third quarter on. And this was all as the Wizards were kind of cutting into this lead slowly but surely, and then eventually overtaking the Wolves down the stretch. The Wizards didn't lead in this game until the final minute 17. I think it was 1:17 left in the game. The first time Washington had a lead. The Timberwolves had led by 20 early, kind of kept the Wizards between 8 and 12 points for much of the game. And then it all came crashing down. And the Timberwolves missed shots in the paint, the inability to deal with the zone, And then, of course, what I opened with, the issues with Beal on the other end of the floor, are the reasons they lost this game. And they're all fixable things, right? It's just frustrating because these collapses keep happening. Even though they won in Dallas, it was still a collapse. I think that last possession, it was so exciting, and it was a fantastic close to stop Kyrie and Luka in the final seconds of that game to get the win. But it kind of made us gloss over the fact the Wolves gave that whole thing back in the first place, right? So closing games continues to be an issue for the Wolves, and it's something we've just got to pay attention to. Chris Finch has to go back to the drawing board in some respects during this All-Star break and try and figure out what's our closing lineup. Obviously matchups matter, right? And I said that after the Dallas game, pulling Gobert in that game was the right thing to do. I would have done it here too. What's he like? He had I think he had 3 blocks in this game, but rim deterrence wasn't when you're just running Bradley Beal and pick and roll over and over and over again. And it's not drop coverage. You can't play drop coverage against Bradley Beal, right? Gobert just wasn't effective late in this game. And this is an example of something, Finch should have pulled the shoot again. All right, let's close with individual studs and duds. We'll do that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends over at Built Bar. If you're looking for a delicious treat but don't want all the fat and calories, then you have to try a Built Bar. We just got through the holidays, and frankly, lump Valentine's Day in there. There's a lot of candy floating around the house this week, right? My goal is to eat a little healthier in 2023. If you're like me, where you want to eat healthier, but you don't want to compromise taste, then I've got just the thing for you. You have to try Built. With Built, healthy is actually tasty. Seriously, they're so delicious you won't think that they're good for you. Perfect for your New Year's resolution. What makes Built Bars so good? Well, for starters, they're covered in 100% real chocolate, and they come in unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and coconut almond. I don't know how Built does it, but these bars taste like a candy bar while maintaining amazing macros. And what's even better is that they're actually healthy. Only 130 calories and 4 grams of sugar with a whopping 17 grams of protein. And now you don't even need to wait around to get a box. For years on Locked On Wolves, literally years, we've been talking about ordering your Built Bars at Built.com. I've done it dozens and dozens of times. But now you can also get them at your local Walmart or Sam's Club. That's right. Head to your nearest Walmart today, walk to the pharmacy section, and grab yourself a box of Built Bars. You can pick up a 4-bar box of cookies and cream, double chocolate, or coconut puffs. If you're close to a Sam's Club, you can run in and grab a 13-bar box with their hit flavors, brownie batter and churro. Just make sure to thank me later. All right, let's close this one and send you into the All-Star break with individual studs and duds from this Wolves loss to the Wizards. Studs, Jaden McDaniels. I mean, the defense on Beal wasn't great down the stretch, but as I've already kind of detailed, not limited to his fault, right? I thought for the most part, Jaden was good. He did a pretty good job of staying out of foul trouble in this game. There were some ticky-tack calls against him, as there often seems to be. He had 15 and 8. He rebounded his position, which we do not always see him do. Was an efficient 5 of 10, 3 of 5 outside the arc, was the only Timberwolves player to actually hit spot-up threes with consistency in this game. Literally was, right? Ant and Jaden each had 3 made threes. The rest of the team combined for 2 made threes in this game. So a good game from Jaden McDaniels, the defense on Beal notwithstanding, because here's the thing. The scheme is to blame. Rudy's to blame somewhat. And, I would lump coaching in there with scheme. And then also the fact that it's Bradley Beal. So it's not like you're giving up the points to it wasn't Kendrick Nunn that went off, right? It was Bradley Beal that went off. So, there's only so much you can do against Bradley Beal, right? So I don't blame Jaden McDaniels for that down the stretch. I thought he played well overall. Despite the issues that I already detailed related to Kyle Anderson down the stretch in this game, or not just down the stretch, really fourth quarter in the zone, missing some of those easy shots in the paint, he gets a stud in this game. He had 18, 8, and 5, 18 points on 7 of 13 shooting. So he still managed to be above 50% from the field. And he often is, because he shoots really only within a few feet of the basket and open threes. He was 0 for 1 outside the arc, but he was 7 of 12 on 2-point shots, 4 of 4 at the line. So that's 18 points on 13 shots, plus 8 assists to only 1 turnover, led the Wolves in assists, 5 rebounds and 2 steals. A solid all-around game from Anderson. I think he should have been playing center down the stretch. I get that sounds crazy. If you just dropped in, you're not a Wolves fan, you haven't watched them, and you've got a team with Karl-Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert, Naz Reid, Nate Knight, and Luka Garza, and you're playing Kyle Anderson at the center. But hey, I think the Wolves probably win this game if they do that in the final 3-4 minutes. Anyway, good game from Kyle Anderson overall. Those missed bunnies in the paint notwithstanding. My last stud in this game, I'm going to go with Anthony Edwards. I know Rudy had 17 and 19. The Wolves as a team were a +4 on the glass, but I mean, how many of those? 7 of those 19 rebounds were offensive, and I'm going to guess 4 or 5 of those 7 were tip-in attempts, rebounds off his own misses for Gobert. I think Ant had a better all-around game than Rudy Gobert. Ant, again, 34 on 26 shots is not great, but he was so good to start. Basically single-handedly built that 20-point lead for the Wolves. And then in the third, he was the biggest reason they got the lead back to 18 points with 2 minutes left of the third quarter. And then, of course, he closed the quarter poorly, just like he did close the second quarter poorly. We so often see these games from Ant where he's awesome for a quarter, awesome for another, half to full quarter. And then the rest of the game is just kind of like, eh. And a lot of times it's rarely like a full half, right? It's usually 1 quarter and a half. Sometimes the third quarter, sometimes the fourth quarter. I'd be willing to bet Ant's second quarters aren't generally very good. If we went and looked at his scoring by quarter, and maybe that's a topic for another show. But anyway, in general, a decent game from Ant. 34 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists, 3 steals, and a block. He did have 6 turnovers and was 3 of 10 outside the arc. But this was a game where not very many Wolves turned in good individual performances. When it comes to duds, Mike Conley, I mean, man, Conley did Conley things. 6 assists, no turnovers. That was nice. But he had no points on 0 of 6 shooting, 0 of 3 outside the arc. He missed a patented Conley floater attempt that would have been nice to have. Actually, I think he missed 2 of them, but there was one late that he missed. He missed at least 2 of his 3 threes were open, like corner 3 attempts that he should have made. Or at least, would have been, he should have had one of them, right? If you shoot 2 wide open corner threes, you got to hit one. So a rough game for Conley, like all things considered. He started really well. There was a really nice lob to Gobert early in the first quarter where it looked like, and I talked about this last week on one of the many shows I did after Conley was acquired, that one of the benefits to Mike Conley is he's so good with the floater game that the floater looks like a lob. Actually, I think I talked about this on the CND NBA show with Chilenga as well, which I think posted over the weekend or maybe Monday morning. But there's a benefit to Conley shooting a floater, which looks like a lob to Rudy. He can do both very well. Teams don't know what you're doing. And the idea that, he's shooting a floater, let's rebound or let's, box out, whatever. You don't realize he's lobbing it to Rudy or vice versa. You think he's lobbing it to Rudy. He's actually getting an open floater because you're worried about the lob. And there was one of those to Rudy early. I think there might have actually been 2 in this game, but there was one that looked exactly like it was a Conley floater, and it was actually a lob to Rudy. So I think we're going to see, 1 or 2 of those a game. What was the stat last year? I think the 2 had 55, 56 lob dunks they connected on, Conley to Gobert over the course of the season in Utah. We're going to see 1 of those a game. And it's nice. There's a couple of free buckets a game that you wouldn't have gotten with D'Angelo Russell at point guard, but you can't get 0 points on 0 made field goals from your starting point guard. Now, obviously, Conley's not going to score. He's not going to be gangbusters in the scoring column. That's not why the Timberwolves acquired him. But you can't get nothing. He can't miss his open threes. So he's a dud. Jalen Noel's the other one. 6 points on 8 shots, 2 of 8 shooting, 0 of 2 outside the arc, 3 rebounds, no assists, 1 turnover for Jalen Noel. He was at minus 14 in 13 minutes. The roller coaster season of Jalen Noel continues. I mean, they needed him in this game. Like, you're relying on your bench to score, especially with no D'Angelo Russell, right? You're sending out a guy who scored a bunch, not always efficiently. Yes, it came with turnovers. Yes, it came with often poor defense. But D'Lo's gone, and you're replacing those points somewhere, right? You have to. Jalen Noel's got to be part of that calculus, at least until Karl-Anthony Towns comes back, and he cannot turn in 6 points on 8 shots in 13 minutes off the bench when no one else on the bench is scoring either, right? Prince led the bench in minutes with 22, but all 5 starters played at least 31 minutes. McLaughlin didn't score. Rivers only played 7 minutes. Nickeil Alexander-Walker had a decent 5-minute stretch in the second quarter. He actually was a +7 in this game, which was a team best. So you need more from Jalen Noel. You just do. Otherwise, I mean, there's no option, right? Like, you need that off your bench. And we saw another poor Jalen Noel game in this one. All right. That's all I have for you today. This is the final show before the All-Star break. No shows over the weekend, but I will do a show, of course, Monday. We'll record that after the All-Star game Sunday. So get a sense for what Ant does. That'll be how we lead Monday's show. Who knows what Ant's going to do? It could be anything. I'm really looking forward to it. All-Star weekend. I'll talk a little bit about the dunk contest. Usually there's a day here before the break where I talk about my predictions, and I didn't get to that this year. So maybe I'll put them on Twitter before the contest on Saturday, just so there's some record, because I thought Towns would win the 3-point contest last year, and he did. So, why not keep that streak going? So I'll take a look at the field. I'll put that on Twitter this weekend. Otherwise, Monday, we'll talk about All-Star weekend. We'll talk about the All-Star game and Ant's performance specifically on Sunday. We'll look ahead to the second half all next week. And the quote unquote second half, because they've only got 21 games left. As of now, the Wolves are virtually tied for the 7-8 spot in the West. With who are they tied with? The Pelicans, the Zionless Pelicans, are tied for the 7-8 spot, a half game behind Dallas for 6, a half game ahead of the Warriors for 9. So a disappointing unofficial first half of the season, a disappointing close to the unofficial first half of the season. But there's a lot still ahead for the Wolves. It's going to be an exciting post-All-Star break run for Minnesota. All right, that's all I have for you today here on the show. Enjoy All-Star weekend. Of course, we'll be back on Monday. A big thank you to those of you that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, you can watch the show on YouTube. You can also listen to it on any of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app. That's on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken. And that's with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Now, make your second listen the Game to Game NBA podcast every moment, every top performance, and every result. Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcast. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.